Hello, and welcome to the first At Work breakout session focusing on automation and IoT and what it means for the workforce in the future. I'm Jen Geller, Senior Editor of CNBC Councils, which includes the Workforce Executive Council and the Technology Executive Council, so I'm in the right place, and I hope you are too. Today, we're going to be looking at how automation and IoT is changing how we work and live, and how also where these technologies might be coming up short when it comes to including everyone in the workforce of the future. I want to welcome my esteemed panel to drive this discussion today. George Batsakis, Chief Strategy Officer of 1901 Group. They provide IT services and solutions in the public and private sector, like cloud, cybersecurity, enterprise scale, managed services. And their number one client is the US government. So he knows a lot about that stuff. Neil Green, Chief Digital Officer at Otis. You've likely ridden their elevators maybe a million times in your life, and in light of the pandemic and the return to the office, elevator efficiency is really having a moment. So love to hear what he's going to have to say. And Alexis Wichowski, Deputy CTO of Innovation for the City of New York, Adjunct Associate Professor at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, and author of The Information Trade: How Big Tech Conquers Countries, Challenges Our Rights, and Transforms Our World. So great panel. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping. It's interactive. There's a couple ways you can pose questions to our panelists. You can either raise your hand. If I call on you, our producer, Anthony, will unmute your audio, but your video won't be turned on, so no worries there. Or you can post a text question in the chat function, and we'll be monitoring that, and we're trying to get to as many as we can. We'll weave them all in. And to kick off this conversation, let's go to Neil Green. The value of IoT. What does it do for us? Let's kind of big picture. Where do we see this going right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jen. So from an IoT perspective, we see this as an important aspect for us to drive our digital acceleration as we think about our field transformation. We think about performance, we think about efficiency improvements that we can have. And one of the immediate ways that we're expecting that our company will benefit from IoT and automation is that it's going to drive better remote diagnostics, better remote monitoring of the elevators that we have in the field. It's going to help us to deliver our predictive analytics so we can better tell when potential things will become an issue and address them before they result in shutdowns. From a customer benefit perspective, our customers can get real-time information on the health of their units. And the way we're bringing this to life is in a two-phase approach. We're starting by taking the data that we have on our existing systems, our existing units, and we are able to monitor that information and identify what's the status of an elevator. And this is an important aspect of us because we often get calls from our customers, from a property management company, from a building owner that says, my elevator is not running. And we would typically send a technician to figure out what's happening. And a lot of times we have something called running on arrival, which means the mechanic gets there, the elevator is actually operational, there's no issue, but it costs us money and time to roll the truck and have the unit looked at. Well, with this remote diagnostics capability, we can now tell, is the elevator really shut down? We can see the status of it, we can tell what's happening, and we can better determine how do we deploy our resources. The second phase for us is now, in addition to taking this diagnostic information or this monitoring information that we have, we're going to add sensors. So there's sensors to track vibration and a number of other variables that gives us better insights on what could potentially go wrong. One of the number one issues we typically have are door failures. And by putting sensors on the elevator, around the elevator, we can get better indication of potentially issues, again, before they become shut down. So we can deploy our mechanics proactively to address those items. So we view IoT as IoT and automation as a huge service transformation effort for us that benefits both us as well as our customers. So we're really looking forward to accelerating the digitization of our field workforce.
Yeah, and I'm interested in light of what we've seen with the pandemic. This is probably accelerated, and I think we all can talk about the scaling up that we've seen of IoT and the need of data and information, a little bit on that, and then we can kind of kind of jump in with the others as well. Kind of how is that accelerated?
Yeah, that's a really important part, because as this pandemic arises and we think about how do we go back to work, what's the new normal, thinking about how we ensure that the elevator doesn't become the bottleneck. You know, whether you have 4 people alone traveling in a car or 1 person, you don't want to lobby with 100 people waiting for the elevator. So how do we use data? How do we use our next-gen dispatching? What sort of sensing solutions? As we get better traffic pattern of what times are more heavily traveled and other times that are not, it helps us to schedule with the buildings on when are the appropriate times that we can have employees come into the office. So the data becomes a huge aspect around scheduling, dispatching, knowing how to get the units to where they need to be, so we don't become a bottleneck in the movement of people in and around the building. So that's a huge aspect moving forward.
Yeah, Alexis, I'm curious, as CTO of New York, what are your thoughts? Obviously, high rises, elevators, office buildings, kind of the bread and butter there. I would love to hear kind of some of your thoughts. And George, I want to bring you in as well in terms of what you're seeing in light of what's Neil's saying in terms of the reams of data. How are you advising your clients, specifically also the government? So let's kick off with Alexis.
Sure, thank you so much. Yeah, one of the things that we need to really leverage right now are the existing sensors that we have deployed. Traditionally, New York City has been moving really aggressively to embrace the Internet of Things and automation and ensure that we're doing it responsibly. We started mostly with environmental sensors, so being able to track flooding or the heat index or air quality issues. So there's a lot of existing sensors that we can leverage right now. And there's also sensors that have been issued in public places for simple pedestrian counts and flow of people. So with those kinds of sensors, we'll be able to, I think, track the kinds of crowding that might occur as people start going back to work en masse, and identify what times are maybe more appropriate to have staggered work schedules. And as also we understand what public transit looks like, we'll be able to make some recommendations because of that data as well. So I think that we're looking at a combination of deploying the sensors that we already have and using that data and trying to figure out where additional sensors could be placed to be most effective in planning for a safe reopening.
Got it. And George, what are your thoughts when you're hearing these things as we're deploying it? You're much broader than, let's say, buildings and cities. You're kind of even bigger. So we're kind of just going up like that.
Yeah, the federal government has a vast array of sensors that are already out there, and Alexis makes a great point. How are we going to leverage the sensors that we have to make us better decisions to be made? But the government wants to invest more in IoT and take advantage of artificial intelligence in general. The problem that they're going to have is so much frustrated data, and being able to use that data productively to make better decisions. The other challenge that we have in implementing IoT for condition-based maintenance or tracking VA hospitals or the Department of Energy, understanding how buildings are being used, are the cybersecurity implications, because each one of those internet-connected devices now represents an opportunity for someone to get into the federal government system. So they're taking baby steps and a lot of emphasis on supply chain and sourcing. Where do these sensors come from? What are the patches, and how do we maintain cybersecurity control on it? So while I think the use of the technology will continue to go really fast and will tend to be just as disruptive as it is in the commercial markets, it'll be kept at a pace where security will be held as one of the most important things.
Yeah, I do want to bring up the notion of cybersecurity and also privacy.
Absolutely.
As we get, and I think we all kind of are dealing, I think even on a personal level, everyone is kind of walking this line, especially in the light of the pandemic and also what we're seeing in AI and what's going on in the world today as well in terms of, racial justice and so on. Talk to me a little bit about how we're balancing, maybe George, this is something that you might want to look at, balancing privacy versus cybersecurity and also all that information coming in. It's almost, I would imagine, and maybe Neil, you can chime in, Alexis too, is it all usable? Is it all, to what end? Is kind of a question, I always wonder.
Yeah, this is a very broad topic. You probably have a whole separate session on the data privacy implications of taking data in passively or actively. The real issue for customers that we see is they're being overrun by data, and it's actually having structured data tagging at an enterprise level to be able to actually use it to apply data science. And that's one of the dirty secrets, is the hunger has grown for use of artificial intelligence and tapping into the data that's coming off of internet connected devices. There really hasn't been an enterprise-wide solution to be able to structure and data tag it in a way so that it's reusable. So what happens is a silo will occur around structuring data around a specific data set. And then if you want to ask that data or query in a different way, it has to be restructured and retagged. And so there's sort of some foundational tools and things that need to be put in place in all agencies and commercial organizations that put a data structure standard in place that'll make that data accessible. When you do that, you can also put some controls in place for who gets access, what are the data protection for individual data rights and also organizational and intellectual property. That's one of the growing concerns. It's actually a very large market in data tagging, data structuring, and it's something that as a managed service provider like us, we're trying to think of how do we roll out services to unfrustrate that data and make it usable for data science.
Yeah, in addition to the abundance of data and how do we actually make sense out of which pieces are important and we can actually drive real intelligence on, in thinking about the question on privacy, imagine in the future where you drive into the office complex and there's a facial recognition system that says, okay, this is Jen. She works on the 17th floor. She likes the temperature in her office set at 72 degrees. She likes the lights set low. And all you have to do is to show up and you walk into the building. The access control is all integrated. It knows who you are. You don't have to scan your badge at the turnstile. You don't have to push a button for an elevator. It knows what floor you're working on. It either texts your phone to say, Jen, take elevator B to your destination. Everything is pre-done. There's a huge conversation that's happening or continues to happen in our industry on how do we ensure that we're protecting the privacy of these individual users. But I think it's that passenger experience, not just navigating inside of a building, but navigating inside of a city. How do we wrestle with those future visions of urban mobility while still ensuring passengers are giving them the comfort that their information is safe and secure?
Yeah, if I could just weigh in on this as well. I think one of the things that we have to do, in addition to having these conversations about data privacy and security, is ensure that the public is aware of and educated about what sensors actually do and what data they can and can't collect. One of the things that we've discovered is there's just not a lot of broad awareness about, for instance, environmental sensors, just because they can gauge the water levels on a building or the heat index doesn't mean that they can also take images of one's face or identify who they are out of a database. So I think there's simple things that we can do, such as labeling and educating people about the devices that are in their environment and what they're capable of. And then there's also, to Neil's point, this issue of sort of decoupling the data profiles from the individual and seeing if there's ways to enhance security along those lines.
That's great. I just want a quick shout out to our audience. If you have any questions, use the raise your hand function or put it in the chat and we can kind of get to you there. Another big topic that I mentioned we are going to be bringing up is digital inclusion or the digital divide, and also that notion of the fourth industrial revolution and the skills gap. Those are kind of these huge monolith issues that we're all talking about and we're all thinking about. Alexis, I want to kind of go to you because you were the one who actually talked to me originally about this digital divide. What are your thoughts, and how does IoT and automation play into all of this? What is your main concern? And then we'll go into George and Neil's thoughts and their kind of vantage points as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that we are very concerned about, and the pandemic really brought this to light, are the number of people who aren't connected on either through their cell phones or through broadband connections. in New York City, which is a very developed city, I think we usually think of the digital divide as maybe a rural issue. But even in New York City, we have about 18% of the population, which is over 1.5 million people, that don't have access to the internet at home on their cell phone or through broadband connections. So when we all went online en masse in March, there was a number of people who couldn't do that. So I think part of the issue is just, it's a fundamental question of equity, making sure that everybody has access to the digital world and services that we all enjoy, and that are more important for work than they've ever been. But also, as we talk about advanced technologies like IoT, we need to ensure that we're not leapfrogging over the basics for people who may not understand exactly what these kinds of technologies are capable of. So there's, I think, an education component to it as well, making sure that we not just get people connected, but once they are connected, that they understand what all these technologies are capable of.
Right, and that plays, George, a little bit, that plays into the skills gap that I think, and things along those lines that you're looking at as well. Talk to me a little bit about kind of how this is playing out and what this might mean for the workforce of the future in general.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what Alexis is saying. It didn't dawn on me that there are that many people that aren't connected in New York City, but it would stand to reason that they are. I had a different approach when I think about this, and it's the vast, incredible opportunity that sits in front of us, because the desire to use technology to do almost everything in our lives presents a fantastic opportunity if we can work together to build the workforce that we need of the future. And I know in our market, there are literally tens of thousands of jobs opening that just aren't being able to be filled because the uptake for the technology and the desire for these new technologies is greater than our ability to generate a workforce to deliver it. And so there's a great opportunity. We don't have to go back to all the same places and grow the workforce of the future. We can actually open our aperture and go to areas where some economies have been left behind and invest in those to train a workforce. In fact, that's what our company did in an effort to try to get out of the feeding frenzy of labor competition within the national capital region, where a lot of us federal government support contractors work. And we built an operations center in rural Virginia in a town called Blacksburg, co-located with a premier academic institution. And we're working together to build curriculum and training a workforce from there, really in some cases from scratch. Now, we have had some transplants come in because it's a great place to live and the quality of life is high and the cost of living is much less than in big cities. We've also had the ability to train literally hundreds of folks that weren't in the technology field. And we have success stories from folks that have gone from unemployed to great jobs and great jobs to internal promotions. And so there's a model there as we have to think about how to fill the gap of what the workforce needs to go to places where they're non-traditional centers to build the technology workforce. And we think we have a model that's replicatable, and there are a lot of other ideas as well, but it's a good contribution to the discussion to think about it in that way.
Yeah, Jen, I will add to that. When I think of industrial service companies like ours, over 40,000 of our employees, more than half our employees are field technicians, right? So as we think about the office workers versus the field workers, we have to make sure that we're not creating this digital divide between the types of workers. So there are two things that are happening now. As I think I mentioned, remote monitoring, remote diagnostics. That's going to enable us to even do over-the-air updates and make changes, potentially do fixes to the elevator remotely. How do we ensure that our digital workforce is conversant, our field workforce are conversant from a digital perspective? And there's a lot of work that's happening there today to ensure that we have the right training and we're ensuring that our field technicians can actually service the units in the future. The second aspect that I'll add is that the use of mobility and applications. We've devised and deployed many digital tools to our field technicians, whether it's our service apps or upgrade apps or things that allows our field technicians to order parts, apps that allows a field technician to dial a subject matter expert in a specific area so they can get real-time help, providing virtual reality tools that can show the expert in one end what the technician is seeing. So we're providing a lot of mobility tools and a lot of applications to help upskill our field technicians. So this is a real issue that we're putting plans in place on, not only addressing it for today, but as our technologies evolve and we have more connected systems in the future, how to ensure that our workforce can support those systems.
Great. We actually have a question for you, Neil, from Brian Segalich. We're going to unmute you, Brian, and looking forward to hearing your question on your question to Neil. It might take a moment. Let's see if we have Brian. Looks like we have him. Hey.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Hey, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me. Neil, it's been great hearing all of the innovation that Otis is doing. One of the questions that I have is, I'm really curious how Otis is currently managing the challenges of adapting to the needs of managing all that data, especially when you think of the variety of data and all those elements, as well as all the different use cases. Just thinking of the massive volumes and the variability of all this data, how are you managing things today and also ensuring that you're able to adapt for handling future needs?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There's a couple of things that we're doing. You know, we've created this global data lake, and we've built a data analytics and a data and analytics team over the last year plus. And we talked a lot about condition-based maintenance or predictive analytics. And it sounds like it's really easy, but it's not a trivial task. You've got to try to predict what are the leading indicators of things that could tell you what's going to go wrong. So our approach is sort of a hub and spoke capability. We are creating algorithms. We're creating specific reporting tools. We're creating, and we're doing that as sort of in the hub, in the central world headquarters formation. And each of our 4 regions, they may have different characteristics of humidity, temperature, so on, that may be different leading indicators of what potentially could go wrong. So what our approach is, create the algorithms, create 60 to 70% of the tools that the teams need from a global perspective, and then allow them, put teams locally in the regions that have data and analytics capabilities so they can customize those global algorithms and tools to their specific needs. So that's how we're thinking about that from an artificial intelligence, and how do we sort of make real decisions, actionable insights, and how they drive the decision making for our all the data that we're now generating from the diagnostics as well as from the sensors.
That's great.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm gonna read a question from David Michael, former CTO at XFL and Madison Square Garden. So Alexis, you probably know it, and all of you can ask a question. It's cybersecurity. We touched on it briefly before with George. What are some of the new technologies? What are some of the things that are on top of your mind? Gaining access to systems like elevators, like city waterways, like government, VA hospitals, even things along those lines. What do you see ahead? What are ways of protecting all of this data as we're getting more personal data, taking temperatures, doing things like that? Alexis, let's start with you, and then George, I'd love to hear your perspective, and then we'll kind of go into the elevator security, which is actually a fear of mine. So we can do that.
Sure, happy to take the question. One of the things that we think most about with cybersecurity with government agencies is about the human operators. So this is one of the first areas that we need to address to make sure that we are secure and that the data that we are stewards of remains secure, is to ensure that people are taking the right steps. And these could be really simple stuff like multi-factor authentication for logins and having individual user accounts rather than anything that, just sending links around. We have I think a great challenge in ensuring that everybody is taking basic cybersecurity prevention measures, not because they're not interested in cybersecurity, but because it seems like it's an extra step, it's an extra hurdle or an obstacle that gets you to the data that you want. But it's really, I think that's where the key to having a secure system lies, is having the human operators who are accessing those systems taking really careful measures.
I muted myself. George, what are your thoughts on cyber?
Yeah, no, this is a huge exploding area. We talked about it earlier. As things come online, they represent a risk. And so different organizations are doing different things. Companies are forming, frankly, around the monitoring of large enterprises and to assess the vulnerabilities in the supply chain and sourcing where these different components come from. And then there has to be a way to assure remediation. And so blockchain is being used in some cases to patch, to verify that patches have been made on known vulnerabilities. The federal government's attacking this in a typically federal government way. In fact, the Department of Defense launched a whole program called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification that they're requiring industry that supports the Department of Defense to actually achieve in order to actually do business with the department. It's a really good idea, but it's going to force them into a continuous monitoring situation and have real good knowledge, not only of what Alexis pointed out, the individual skill set of the folks that are operating on these systems, but anyone else who has access, and then maintaining security and visibility of new things as the enterprise grows and changes. That's the other problem here, is that technology is moving very fast, and it's getting adapted really fast. And with those new inclusions of new devices and capabilities come new vulnerabilities all the time. And so staying ahead of it is going to be the chore of this generation, I think, to take advantage of the technology and do it in a secure way.
Yeah, and I'll add a couple of points, Jen. So don't be scared of riding the elevator. The safety brake that our founder invented has been a very positive thing for ensuring safety inside the elevator. But as we think about all these connected systems, whether it's sensors and gateways, or as we think about adding APIs to create new services, you are introducing, and you have all these gateways that are connecting the information back to the cloud. Sometimes they're connected to the local network of the building, sometimes they're not. So it does create an additional potential attack surface. But we have to be very diligent in how we work with our partners, the building management systems, how we work with the architects, how we work with the building owners, the property managers. We do a lot of penetration testing. We have very specific cyber protocols that our product development teams have to go through. We're bringing external partners to help us test and ensure that we're making the right decisions. It's not one of these things that you're going to ever say it's 100% safe or bulletproof. Someone will always find new ways, but we have to be diligent. We have to keep making patches. We have to share information. I need to spend more time with Alexis talking about the broader, what's happening in the city and how do we ensure not just the elevator, right? You've got to think of the elevator as a system within a system. It's inside the building, it's inside the city. And then working with folks like George to think about what are they seeing, what are they hearing, and how do we ensure that the environment is safe. But it's just being diligent. It's remaining focused on the threats that we're hearing and doing a lot of penetration testing and preparation along the way. That's
terrific. And I also love how you wrapped it all together, how actually everyone can kind of work together on this and connect. We're actually going to be right on time. We have one quick thing. Andrew asked a question on mobility automation. I guess that's for you, Neil. You're quite popular. Everyone likes elevators. And handling real-time safety precautions during work. I think you mentioned a little bit about the idea of everyone, the remote access that you have, but what are some of your thoughts there? Just quick as we begin to wrap.
Yeah, mobility automation. I'll give you an example. We've got an application that we deliver to our field technicians that allows them to listen to the different acoustic and vibration as they travel in an escalator. There's some functions that happen, some AI that happens real time in the app in the phone, and there's some AI that does, there's some data that gets sent back to the cloud. So we're thinking about this in a number of aspects, not just the mobility applications that we're developing, but the actual, the elevator itself. As we're allowing, an example that we're really thinking about now is the pandemic has shined a spotlight on no contact goods and services delivery. So there are robots that are looking to be integrated for whether they're cleaning and hospitality, robots for using in food delivery and hospitals. So as we think about security and mobility, how do we enable these autonomous systems to use the elevator to operate within the building and ensure that we're not creating additional safety risks? There's a lot of work that our industry and our company is doing to make sure that we can ensure that everyone is as safe as possible as they, again, they move around inside buildings.
This has been a terrific conversation. I want to thank our panelists, George, Alexis, and Neil.